Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we are diving into one of the most heartbreaking, controversial, and politically loaded stories in South Africa's post-apartheid era, the story of Fezekile Ntsukela Kuzwayo, a woman the public came to know by the name Khwezi. 16 years ago, South Africa was gripped by a storm. A young woman had just accused the then Deputy President of the country, Jacob Zuma, of rape. That accusation alone was explosive. But what followed, the trial, the media frenzy, the public shaming, the chants outside the courtroom, and the silence that followed, revealed far more than just the details of a legal case. It exposed the nation's ongoing battle with sexual violence, political power, and the enduring struggle for justice. Khwezi was not just a name. She was a person. A daughter. A poet. A fighter. And most of all, a survivor. But in a country where power often speaks louder than truth, Khwezi's voice was drowned out, distorted, and ultimately dismissed. So grab your coffee or tea, and let's unpack this complicated and emotional story, one that still raises uncomfortable but necessary questions in 2025. Back in 2005, Fezekile Kuzwayo, known to Zuma and his family since childhood, stepped forward with an accusation that rocked the foundations of South African politics. She claimed that Zuma, a man who had once fought apartheid alongside her father, raped her in his home. Now pause for a second. Imagine that. You're accusing a man who isn't just politically powerful, he's part of the liberation struggle, a symbol of the old guard. And you're telling the world he did something horrific behind closed doors. That's a kind of courage many of us can't even fathom. But instead of protection, Khwezi found herself under siege. The media dug into her past like vultures. Political loyalists treated her like a traitor. Outside the courtroom, Zuma supporters danced and sang songs calling her a liar. Some even went as far as accusing her of being part of a political conspiracy to bring Zuma down. She was mocked, her identity leaked, her character assassinated. The court ultimately acquitted Zuma in 2006, arguing that the sexual encounter was consensual and that Khwezi's version of events lacked credibility. But here's the thing, justice isn't just about courtrooms. It's about how society treats those who come forward. And in Khwezi's case, that treatment was brutal. She went into exile, fearing for her safety. Her life never returned to normal. And despite her resilience, she carried the emotional scars until her untimely death in 2016 after a long illness. Now, let's be honest, South Africa didn't just fail Khwezi. It failed every survivor who watched the trial hoping for a different outcome. It failed every woman who thought, maybe if I speak up, someone will believe me. Because what the country saw was that even when you come forward, even when you're brave enough to testify against one of the most powerful men in the land, you're still more likely to be shamed than supported. And it's not just the legal system that failed. It was the entire social framework. Khwezi wasn't only discredited in court, she was torn apart in public. Her sexual history, her mental health, her past trauma, all of it dragged into the spotlight not for justice, but for humiliation. It was a performance of national denial. But let's pause and reflect on the name Khwezi itself. It means a star in isiZulu. And though they tried to extinguish her light, her legacy still shines. Artists have painted murals of her. Writers have written poetry in her honor. Activists carry her name when they demand justice for survivors. She became, ironically, more powerful in death than she ever was allowed to be in life. But is that the justice she deserved? We must ask the hard questions. Why was Zuma, even after the trial, able to climb the political ladder and eventually become president? Why did millions of South Africans either ignore or forget what had happened? And perhaps most importantly, what would have happened if Khwezi had accused someone with no political clout? Would her story have ended differently, or was her fate sealed the moment she dared to speak up? Let's not sugarcoat it, South Africa has a sexual violence crisis. The stats don't lie. Tens of thousands of rapes are reported every year, but conviction rates remain staggeringly low. Survivors face barriers at every stage, from police stations where they're not taken seriously, to hospitals where there's no trauma-informed care, to courtrooms where they're treated like the accused. And while Khwezi's case is one of the most high-profile, it's far from the only one. It just became the national mirror, reflecting back our failures, our discomfort, our refusal to confront male power and the patriarchy that still dominates our society. In 2016, just before her death, a powerful moment occurred. As President Jacob Zuma gave a speech, a group of 4 women silently stood up with posters bearing messages like, "I am Khwezi." It was a simple act, but it hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, her name was back in the headlines. People remembered. They were forced to. Even if for a brief moment. That protest reminded the country that you can bury the truth, but it never disappears. And that memory, that unresolved tension, still lingers in South Africa's conscience. Today, in 2025, Zuma is no longer in power, but he remains politically active through the MK party. He's still cheered by crowds, still wields influence. And yet, Khwezi's name is rarely mentioned. Her grave is quiet. But her story is louder than ever. So what now? What do we do with this legacy? First, we must demand accountability. Not just for the past, but for the present. Survivors need justice, support, and dignity. Secondly, we must change the culture that makes it easier to believe powerful men over vulnerable women. And finally, we must teach the next generation that silence is not the answer. That believing survivors is not a matter of political loyalty, but of moral duty. Khwezi's story didn't end in a courtroom. It continues in every South African home where a survivor weighs the risks of coming forward. It lives in every whispered confession, every hidden trauma, every protest sign held high in the name of justice. So let's not forget. Let's not move on too quickly. And most of all, let's not pretend the fight is over. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, then please do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell us, what does justice for Khwezi look like to you? And what would it take to make sure this never happens again? Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and as always, see you next time.